Is it worth upgrading to a 5th generation Ryzen in 2022? Well, let's find out. Stay tuned. Okay, I might have lied. I couldn't wait. I upgraded the Ryzen 5 3500 in this system to a 5600, and now we're gonna see if it was worth it. The Ryzen 5 3500 was an OEM processor that came in a lot of Dells, HPs, and other cookie cutter style computers. It was similar to the 3600, but lacked hyper-threading and had a little bit less cache. The CPU was never available in a retail box. In fact, mine came from eBay during the evolution of this system here. It definitely served me well, but upgrading the GPU to an RTX 3060 has been pretty much CPU bound ever since. So it was definitely time for an upgrade. But you know what? With the 7000 series Ryzen out, many people might be considering an upgrade to that. However, in order to run a 7000 series, you need to replace both your motherboard and your memory, because the 7000 series not only uses a new socket, but also comes with only support for DDR5. This is made even worse because the 7000 series motherboards are actually pretty expensive, and DDR5 is still really expensive too. So, is it worth spending all that money for the latest generation Ryzen, or could you maybe get by with a 5000 series making use of your old motherboard and memory? Unfortunately, I don't have a 7000 series to compare it to, but I do have a 3000 series Ryzen that I can upgrade to a 5000 series and see what kind of benefit we can get out of it. So let's go ahead and tear this thing apart and get this new CPU installed so we can see if this upgrade was worth it. Now, if you have an air-cooled system, then this shouldn't be that big of a deal. However, with a water-cooled system with hard lines, that took me almost 3 hours to swap the CPU. You know, I really hope this upgrade was worth the money and time spent. Let's jump into benchmarks and see how well this thing did. The first game I looked at was Control. I benchmarked this game at 2560 by 1440. I unfortunately can't play this game at 21 by 9 to fit the aspect ratio of my ultra-wide, so I have to lower it down to 16 by 9. However, now with a new CPU, maybe I won't have to do that anymore. This game supports RTX and DLSS, so I went ahead and benchmarked it with and without RTX and DLSS enabled. With RTX and DLSS disabled, I got an average FPS of 67.9 on the 3500. Once upgrading to the 5600, I got an average FPS of 107.6. Yeah, that's a 45.2% improvement. If all my benchmarks look like this, then this was definitely worth the upgrade. Continuing on, after enabling RTX, the Ryzen 3500 was able to get 46.1 FPS. Once upgrading to the 5600, we were able to get 73.8 FPS. That's a 46.2% improvement. Now with DLSS and RTX enabled, I was able to get 80.6 FPS on the 3500. But once upgrading to the 5600, we were able to get 115.7 FPS. That's a 35.8% improvement. I'm just blown away at how much improvement I got off of this one game. Continuing on, the next game we're looking at is Cyberpunk 2077. This game supports both RTX and DLSS. And as before, I tested it with them both on and off. I also benchmarked this game at 1080p because it's Cyberpunk and it pretty much puts my system on its knees most of the time. With RTX and DLSS disabled, I was able to get 80.4 FPS on the Ryzen 3500. After upgrading to the 5600, I got a whopping 105.4 FPS. That's a 26.9% improvement. With RTX enabled on the 3500, I got an FPS of 38.4. After upgrading to the 5600, my FPS was 37.5. That's a loss of 2.4%. I redid this test a couple of times just to make sure that was the case, and all the benchmarks came out pretty close to the same number. A little disappointed at this point, I moved on to testing Cyberpunk with DLSS enabled. On the 3500, I was able to get 61 FPS. Once upgrading to the 5600, I was able to improve that to 68.9 FPS. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's still a 12.2% improvement. The game definitely didn't give us the huge benefit that we saw in Control. However, I know exactly why this is, and it's going to become more apparent as we go through this list of benchmarks. I'll cover it more in the wrap-up at the end. The next game I looked at was Red Dead Redemption 2. I only benchmarked this game in Vulkan because DirectX 12 just isn't working with DLSS right now. I also had this game set to 3440 by 1440. With DLSS disabled on the Ryzen 5 3500, we were able to get 62.2 FPS. But once upgrading to the 5600, we got 61.4 FPS. That's a loss of 1.3%. But it's pretty close to the margin of error, so I'm going to call this one a tie. Once enabling DLSS, the 3500 was able to get 68.3 FPS. Not a huge improvement with DLSS in this case, but once upgrading to the 5600, I was able to get 76.9 FPS. That's an 11.8% improvement. This game might be giving us some clues that explains our benchmark results. If you already know what that is, then mention it in the comments below. But like I said, I'll cover that more at the end of the video. The next game we're looking at was Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This game supports both RTX and DLSS, and the resolution for these benchmarks is 3440 by 1440. With RTX and DLSS disabled, we were able to get 69.4 FPS on the 3500. Once upgrading to the 5600, we got 69 FPS. That's a loss of 0.4 FPS, or about 0.6%. We can definitely call that within the margin of error. Once enabling RTX, we got 68.9 FPS with the 3500. You might notice that that's not a huge drop in FPS from not having RTX enabled. The reason for this is that Shadow of the Tomb Raider only supports RTX shadows, so they're not very taxing on the system. But they're definitely worth enabling. Once upgrading to the 5600 though, we got 68.6 FPS. That's a loss of 0.1 FPS or 0.1%. Again, definitely within the margin of error. After enabling DLSS, the 3500 was able to get 98.5 FPS. DLSS definitely gives us a big boost, but unfortunately, the 5600 didn't. We got an average FPS of 98.4 with the 5600. Only a loss of 0.1 FPS, but definitely within the margin of error. It turns out that Rise of the Tomb Raider pretty much runs exactly the same on a 3500 or a 5600. Next game we're looking at is Dirt Rally 2. I want to throw some older games in that don't support RTX or DLSS to see how well they performed. This game was ran on my monitor's native resolution of 3440 by 1440. With the 3500, we were able to get 76.1 FPS. And once upgrading to the 5600, we got 78.1 FPS. It's only a 2.6% improvement, but I'll take it, I guess. The next game we're looking at is GTA 5. According to Steam, I've logged more hours in this game than any other game I have in my Steam account. For that matter, you could probably take the bottom 50% of the games I own and it would have more consecutive time in GTA 5 than all of them combined. This game was benchmarked at 3440 by 1440 with the graphics setting cranked to as high as they'll go. On the Ryzen 5 3500, we were able to achieve a frame rate of 107.7. Once upgrading to the 5600, we got an average frame rate of 113.9. Considering how much time I spend in this game, a 5.6% improvement is definitely a good thing, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. Moving on, I also took a look at Cinebench R15 and R20. We'll go through these fairly quickly. On Cinebench R15, with the CPU test, we got a score of 1,094 with the 3500. Once upgrading to the 5600, we got a score of 1881. That gives us an improvement of 53.3%. Staying in Cinebench R15, I did the GPU benchmark and was able to get 125.5 FPS on the 3500. But once upgrading to the 5600, we were able to get 222.9. That gave us a 56% improvement. In Cinebench R20, the CPU score for the 3500 was 2722, and our CPU test for the 5600 was 4361. That gave us an improvement of 46.3%. As you can see from the benchmarks, the Ryzen 5 5600 definitely outperformed the 3500 in the majority of the tests, but not all of them. You might be wondering why that is. Why in Control did we see an improvement of almost 50%, but in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it ran pretty much exactly the same? The reason for this is because Control is a lot more CPU dependent than Shadow of the Tomb Raider. One of the reasons for this is that I ran Control at a lower resolution. The general rule is, in gaming, the higher the resolution goes, the more GPU dependent the game gets. That's why we saw great numbers in Cyberpunk at 1080p. I considered lowering my resolution to 1080p in all of these games just so we can see big improvements. However, I decided not to because ultimately I wanted to see how much better the 5600 was at the games I play, how I actually play them. Lowering GTA 5 to 1080p would have given a much bigger difference in performance, but that would just be a number. I wanted to see how much better the game would run as I was playing it. So, in the games that I was already CPU bound in, I saw a huge improvement. But in the games that I was more GPU bound in, I didn't see much of an improvement at all. So, was it worth upgrading to a Ryzen 5 5600? I think it was. The system is a lot snappier and the overall performance of the system feels a lot better than it did. The 3500 was starting to feel kind of sluggish. And I picked up this 5600 on Newegg for $137. The cost to upgrade to a 7000 series would have well exceeded $500. Unfortunately, I will likely have to upgrade much sooner with the 5600 than I would have if I would have gone with a 7000 series. But for the price, I think it was still worth it because the 7000 series is going to drop in price as it gets older. Maybe I'll have to actually overclock the 5600 and see how well that does. I haven't overclocked a CPU on this channel yet. Let me know in the comments below if that's something you'd like to see. I mean, it is water cooled and it's pretty much going to waste as it is right now. So we should probably try it, right? But with all that said, if you'd like to see the full evolution of this system here, from its start as just used parts from eBay to the way it is today, then check out this playlist here. This system has definitely come a long way from its beginning and proves that you can build a pretty good system one upgrade at a time. You guys have a great day.